In this video, I'm going to talk about something that I reckon a lot of us wrestle with: reading. How to read more, and more importantly, how to read better. But before we crack on, let's clear up a few things about reading that tend to get, a bit misunderstood. Now, we love books, right? But here's the thing, you can waste time reading too. It's not like just because you've got a book in hand, you're automatically doing something profound. Reading can be as much of a time filler as watching a telly or binging a series on Netflix. So let's be real about that. Just because someone's reading doesn't mean they're necessarily doing anything more intellectual or making better use of their time. Alright, now that we've got that out the way, let's talk about something even trickier to digest. And this is important because it's quite the uncomfortable truth, I'd say. You see, someone could be reading every single day, for years even, but that doesn't mean their understanding, their reasoning, or their capacity for critical thought is actually developing. Mad, isn't it? There are people who rarely read, and they could very well be far more insightful than a lot of so-called bookworms. So here's what we've got to get our heads around. If the goal is to learn, to broaden our knowledge, to improve ourselves, we've got to accept that reading is just one medium. It's not a be-all and end-all. For centuries, it's been the primary way to learn. But these days, we've got a whole load of other tools at our disposal. YouTube videos, podcasts, online courses, AI, the monopoly that books had. It's been broken, hasn't it? But, and here's the big but, reading still has a very unique value. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Why reading remains so crucial and how we can do it better. Okay, so we've acknowledged that reading isn't the only way to learn. That's clear as day now. But let's not be too hasty in thinking we can just replace it entirely with videos and podcasts. Reading still has its own special benefits that honestly you can't get from other mediums. Let me give you an example. When a writer sits down to put together a book or an article, it's not just a free-flowing conversation, is it? No, it's structured, it's planned, it's methodical. A writer has to articulate their ideas clearly, organize them into a logical flow, and then present them in a way that builds a coherent argument. There's a real depth of thought that goes into it. Compare that to, say, a podcast. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a good podcast, but it's a different beast. There's an off-the-cuff element to it, a kind of spontaneous dialogue. And while that's brilliant for discussion, it's not always the best for deep, structured thinking. The beauty of a book or an article is that it allows the author to refine their ideas. They can go back, revise, improve. It's a polished piece of thinking. When we read something like that, it has this incredible effect on our minds. We are engaging with an argument that's been thought out and structured. It forces our minds to also think in that structured way. We start seeing things in frameworks, developing a better sense of logic and reasoning. Over time, this has a long-term benefit. Our brains get used to thinking more clearly, more critically, and let's face it, that's a skill we could all do with sharpening, isn't it? So that's reason one. Reading helps us develop that methodical, logical way of thinking. It's not just about information absorption, it's about learning how to think better. Right, now here's the million-pound question. Why is it so hard to make reading a habit? Everyone loves the idea of being a reader, but when it comes down to actually doing it, it's tough, isn't it? There are a few reasons for this, so let's unpack it a bit. But before that, how did you find the video so far? If you found it useful, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. One of the biggest issues is the competition for our attention. Let's be honest, we live in an era of endless distractions. Social media, TV, emails, notifications pinging every 5 minutes. Our brains have got used to this constant stimulus. So when we try to sit down with a book, which is a much slower activity, it feels almost unnatural. Another problem? Reading requires effort. You can't just sit back and let the words wash over you. To read properly, to read actively, you've got to engage, reflect, think critically, and well, that's not always easy after a long day when all you want to do is zone out. It's much easier to throw on a podcast or watch a video, right? But here's a little secret. It's not that people don't want to read. It's that they haven't built the habit in a way that works for them. So let's talk solutions. First up, don't be overly ambitious. A lot of people set themselves ridiculous goals like reading for 2 hours a day every day. That's a first track to burnout, especially if reading isn't something you're already doing regularly. Instead, start small. Read for 10 or 15 minutes a day and be consistent with it. It's not about volume at first, it's about consistency. Build the habit, then you can scale up from there. Second, eliminate distractions. Easier said than done, I know, but it's crucial. Find a quiet space. Put your phone on silent or even airplane mode if you need to. Make your reading time sacred, even if it's just for a short period. Focused reading is far better than trying to squeeze it in while multitasking. Another tip, read what genuinely interests you. Don't force yourself to read something just because you think you should. If it's not grabbing your attention, switch it up. Read something that excites you. This keeps the momentum going. And audiobooks. Now, I know it's a bit of a gray area because technically you're listening, not reading, but let's be flexible here. If you're struggling to carve out time to physically read, throw on an audiobook while you're driving or cooking. It's still absorbing content and ideas, so it counts. And here's a cheeky one. Have multiple books in the go. Sometimes you're just not in the mood for a heavy non-fiction, and that's fine. Have a lighter novel or a different genre you can switch to when you're not feeling one particular book. It's about keeping the momentum up without forcing yourself into a corner. So, why go through all this effort to read more and read better? Well, the long-term benefits are massive. It's about training your mind to think clearly, logically, and critically. You're constantly exposing yourself to new ideas, new ways of thinking, and that has a compounding effect. You start seeing the world differently, your problem solving improves, and your ability to process information becomes sharper. Books force you to slow down, to reflect, and to digest complex ideas. Something that's a bit of a lost art in this fast-paced world. Over time, this helps you not only with learning, but with life in general. If you found this video useful, I suggest watching this one as your next video, where I talk about my top 5 favorite books on critical thinking. So, see you there.